Hi there, welcome to Indycar on Friday morning. It's the 3rd of August and I'm Gordon Ross. In today's news, I'm looking at the closure of the Royce Marine plant in Dalgety Bay in Fife, reported to me by my friends over on the East Coast last night. It had already been a rundown of the plant that Rolls-Royce has over in Dalgety Bay over the last few months. But it now seems that it is entirely likely that the plant is just going to close, simply because the orders for warships on the Clyde are just not going to happen. It was hoped that there might still be some very faint chance that there might be a warship or two manufactured by the Clyde yard at Scotstoun, but now hopes faded completely with the suspension of the new frigate orders that were promised with the no vote. So the shipyard workers on the Clyde yet again sold out by the UK government for the price of a no vote. The promises made now completely broken, and somewhere in the region of 5,000 men and women who work at the yard in Scotstoun now face redundancy and looking for a new job later this year. Rolls-Royce themselves have been in difficulties with various engine contracts from the Ministry of Defence, most notably the last series of destroyers which were manufactured by the Scotstoun yard, which when sea trialled worked perfectly well in UK waters, but as soon as they encountered the warm waters of the Gulf or the Mediterranean, their Rolls-Royce engines overheated and shut down, making the ships virtually useless, dead in the water and having to be towed ashore. A major design flaw which you would have thought the experts at Rolls-Royce would have thought about. The fact that the cooling systems in an engine like that would have had to have had specially uprated radiators and cooling systems deliberately manufactured for warmer waters, but apparently that seemed to have gone past them. The upshot of all this, though, is that we can't trust the UK Ministry of Defence to produce orders to maintain our shipyards on the Clyde. It just is no longer tenable. Whether this is because of Brexit or whether this is part of a deeper malaise in the Ministry of Defence, I can't really tell you. But the indications were already there before Brexit was actually voted on, that the Ministry of Defence was scaling back its operations in manufacturing new ships for the Navy in the Clyde yards. Some work has already been moved to various other yards in the south of the border. But the fact of the matter is that a hull for a ship can be manufactured cheaply almost anywhere else. It is only the weapon systems that go into the ships which are really high-tech and manufactured here. These are the things which actually cost the big money. A hull of a ship is not so expensive as you might expect. The engines, the control systems, the defensive radar, the radar-guided guns, the guided missiles, torpedoes, all of these things are extremely expensive. The Ministry of Defence, though, as we know, has already almost bankrupted itself building 2 unnecessary aircraft carriers, both of which were contracts written by the Labour government and which Gordon Brown must have okayed, despite the fact that there were massive cancellation penalty clauses written into the contract, which meant that if the government cancelled these 2 aircraft carriers, that they would have to pay back to British Aerospace, or BAE Systems as it's now known, the entire cost of both ships. So it was impossible for the British government and the yards to not build these aircraft carriers. So we now have 2 empty aircraft carriers for which we cannot manufacture any aircraft anymore, because we simply don't have any Sea Harrier jump jets to build, and we gave the rights to making those to the Americans, which now means that all of our defence aircraft for the Navy have to be manufactured by other countries. And the only other country which Britain seems to be prepared to deal with is the United States, which has the most expensive jump jet in the world, which costs somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 times the cost of a British designed Harrier GR8, which would have been perfectly acceptable as a sea defence and strike aircraft in its own right. So we're stuck with the F-35s, and the F-35s have been dogged with problems ever since they were manufactured. The The F-35s have started arriving in England now to their squadrons, and the pilots are being trained to fly them. But the issues with the F-35 go on and on. They are fantastically expensive, supposedly stealthy aircraft. And yet, in a dogfight, they are no better or worse than the Typhoon Eurofighter, which Britain has already manufactured by the hundreds with its European partners. So the defence industry in the UK, when it comes to Scotland, is basically pulling the plug. There are, I think, 3 patrol vessels being built on the Govan side of the Clyde by BAE Systems for another government at the moment. But after these orders are completed, it seems unclear what, if any, orders will continue from the British government. Given the fact that we are still in NATO and we're required to spend at least 2% of our gross national product on defence spending according to the NATO rules, it seems very difficult for Britain now to keep up with that promise without bankrupting other areas of the economy. And so it seems also likely that the numbers of new ships being purchased is going to disappear. In fact, there probably won't be any more new ships manufactured now for the foreseeable future, simply because with Brexit looming and with the chaos and the problems that that is going to create, guaranteeing new ship orders is impossible, because the government now has to try to keep the country's economy afloat through the next between 10 and 50 years. And in that state, that weakened state, there's no way they're going to be able to afford to build expensive new warships on the Clyde. Not only is it Rolls-Royce in Dalgety Bay and their engine plant which is going to close, remember that there are also all kinds of other defence system manufacturers in the supply chain, one of which is Thales, also in Govan, which manufactures the electronic guidance systems for laser-guided bombs and smart weapons of all kinds. So further down the line, I would anticipate there will be other job losses because of the cuts in defence spending. That is unfortunately the state of affairs as it is at the moment. Scotland's defence industry contracting severely and the jobs migrating southwards as they normally do in times of difficulty back to England. We still have all of the UK submarine fleet supposedly coming to Faslane in the near future, and that's actually a lot of submarines, and the actual village which has been built to house the submariners and their families at Faslane is gigantic, but still nothing has happened yet about that fleet moving north. We're still stuck with the 4 Trident boats in Faslane at the moment and 1 or 2 others in for service, but not the huge numbers promised by the UK government. It seems unclear as to whether that will ever happen either. Just about everything that the government promised in 2014 with regards to defence spending in Scotland has been reneged upon already. So I remain to be convinced that something good will come out of this in terms of defence industries in Scotland. And I think it was always a mistake to put all of our eggs in the one basket with regards to shipbuilding. It's clear now that the future of shipbuilding is going to be in the manufacturing of greener ships, ships which do not burn oil, ships which perhaps burn things like liquefied natural gas, or which run on a mixture of biofuels and electricity generated by tidal power. And all of these things are currently being investigated, developed and built further down the Clyde by Ferguson Marine Engineering, which I believe is probably going to be the future of shipbuilding on the Clyde. I hope so. I hope we move away from defence and warship building in favour of a much more stable platform, which would be civilian shipbuilding for green shipping. Anyway, that's the sort of maritime news today from Indycar. At the moment, it seems unlikely, I'm just saying unlikely from the mood music that I've been hearing, that when the SNP government returns from the recess, it seems unlikely that they will immediately call another IndyRef. They're very wary of being rushed into an independence referendum, just because the British government is provoking them by creating this Mundell office in Edinburgh and holding the threat of taking over Holyrood in front of them. It could be, and there have been some discussions recently, that Mundell's shadow Scottish government in his new department in Edinburgh is simply a red herring, that it is in fact just an empty threat which is being used, as I say, to rush the SNP government into a hasty independence referendum for which they're not really ready yet. In practical terms, getting ready for a new referendum, if we follow the rulebook, means that when the SNP return from their recess, that they will have to legislate for a new Section 30 bill. They'd have to pass a motion in Holyrood which is formally asking the British government now for a Section 30 order, and then that will take somewhere in the region of 6 months, having gone through the various stages here at Holyrood, first of all to become law here, then to be laid before the British government. And of course the British government, we know, is unlikely to grant the Section 30 order before Brexit happens. So in all likelihood, the independence referendum, if and when it does happen, may not happen until 2020, by which time it will be too late for Scotland. We will be out of the European Union, and there will be a threat to the Holyrood Parliament. Whether or not Mundell moves to take it over or not, there is always going to be that threat, and that means there is the risk that the window of opportunity for another independence referendum closes yet again, or at least narrows down so much that we have to make a hasty indie ref before Mundell can move to close down Holyrood. We know that the Tory government and the Tories in Scotland were never in favour of Holyrood. They fought tooth and nail to prevent it being built, and they have fought ever since from within it to belittle it, to infantilise it, and to mock the whole place, and they will continue to do that. So the SNP is in a difficult position when it returns from the recess. They have to decide how best to proceed. But I can reassure you of one thing, and that is that the SNP government, although most people don't realise this, has a very able and capable department which role plays and plays out every possible scenario that the British government could create. And they look at every single possibility, every threat, every sudden move, every unpredictable move that the British government might make to try and pull the rug out from under them, and they will have anticipated all of these things. So I am confident that the SNP will, whatever happens, have an answer for whatever the British government tries next. So watch this space. If I hear any more news or any whispers from within government about things, I will let you know, but I won't compromise the confidence of anybody in the SNP government or anybody inside the Scottish Parliament to do it. It's too important for me to lay plans out in public which should be kept secret, because the British government is extremely secretive, one of the most secretive governments anywhere in the world, with one of the most sophisticated spy networks and the most sophisticated propaganda network. And so we're fighting against an octopus that has tentacles in every part of Scottish life. And the only way that we can really deal with that is to keep role-playing, to keep looking at all the possibilities, all of the things that that government might do to try and thwart independence while it is also trying to get out of the European Union. But as I say, I have confidence that the SNP is watching this very carefully, and that they have plans for every single eventuality and every possible move that the UK government might make in the next few months. It could be that we will have an independence referendum in the autumn. I sincerely hope we do, because I believe that support for it is far higher than any of the polls are predicting at the moment. And our role as the movement's members, the unofficial independence movement members, is to keep people thinking and talking about it, to keep raising the issue of independence as the answer to Scotland's woes, not a risk anymore. It's no longer the risky thing for us to do. It's now the safest thing for us to do when it comes to international affairs, when it comes to our economy, and when it comes to the future of our children and their jobs and prospects in the future as well. So I'll end on that note. Remember that it's a dangerous time that we live in, and the government, our Scottish government, has a very difficult task ahead of it, trying to guess what the UK will do next in a very unpredictable, a very febrile sort of political atmosphere at the moment, where nobody knows what will happen next. All bets are off in 2018. We are so far down the rabbit hole that we've lost sight of the surface now, and we now are at the mercy of a headless government, which is literally just reacting to things as they happen. And in terms of the European Brexit negotiations, it now looks as though the UK will try to negotiate a very weak but slightly better than walking away Brexit deal, because it's all they're going to get. And at the moment we just don't know what that will be. We will know by October, because by that time the UK government has to have firmed up the broad brushstrokes of what they're asking for, and the European Union will have to say which of those things they know to be acceptable, and only then will we know what this Brexit will be, and then we'll be in a position to decide how we want to vote in a referendum. Anyway, I'll leave you with those thoughts today. I'm afraid I don't have any happier news for you today, but the closure of Royce Marine in Dalgety Bay is the start of a route in terms of manufacturing for the Ministry of Defence in Scotland. I believe it's the start of a long process of decline now. I'll see you again next week. Have a good weekend. Bye for now.